Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Weird Tales talk video. The video series where I basically give my thoughts, opinions, analysis of a short weird tale, either by Lovecraft or by anyone else really. And of course is done in a podcast style video, so feel free to click away and do something else while you just listen to what I have to say. You're not going to miss anything visually speaking. Anyway, today we're going to be looking at The Rats in the Walls by H.P. Lovecraft, one of his most famous stories, I guess you could say, because pretty much every compilation I see of him, I pick up the compilation and there I see The Rats in the Walls. And so let's see what The Rats in the Walls is all about. First off, I guess maybe we should talk about the genesis of the story, where Lovecraft came up with it. Well, it was written in 1923, I think, so Lovecraft was about 33 years old when he came up with it. Apparently it came from, according to S.G. Joshi's notes that I'm consulting about this story, it came from a very commonplace event that happened in Lovecraft's life. He saw the wallpaper cracking late at night, and then he started to imagine, as Lovecraft is famous for doing. His imagination is amazing. So basically he just saw wallpaper cracking and he wrote it down in a commonplace book. I did a video about his commonplace book. I think it's really interesting, so go check that out. But basically in his commonplace book he wrote down this: wallpaper cracks off in a sinister shape, man dies of fright. And then there was another commonplace book entry that predated the writing of the story that went: horrible secret in crypt of ancient castle discovered by dweller. So basically if you combine those two entries into his commonplace book, it's very obvious that he just combined the two and then he came up with The Rats in the Walls. I'm assuming that a lot of you have read the story. I provided a link to it a week ago, and I said, hey guys, please, I'm going to include spoilers here. So please go read the story and all that sort of stuff. So I'm assuming you know the plot and what happens and all that. So I'm going to gloss over that. But long story short, a guy from America, Delaporte, the first name is never given, discovers that he has a sort of old family castle that sort of belongs to the Delaporte family. And after his son dies in World War I, he decides to basically team up with his son's friend from the war and basically rebuild his family's homestead, where his family came from. This being in Manchester in England, I believe. Basically he rebuilds the place, but despite being top of the line, remodeled in the top of the line manner, everything's brand new except the foundations, he hears rats in the walls. Ta-da, the name of the story. And then he decides that he needs to find out what the hell is causing these rats to drive him insane. Basically, he's not going insane yet, but he's the only one that can hear these rats. Him and his cat. Now, okay, the cat. The cat. We'll get to the cat later, because I'm sure a lot of you who have clicked on this video want to hear about the cat. Anyway, him and his cat, basically they're the only ones that can really hear the rats in the walls. And the rats keep going downwards into this basement, right? And even further downwards. So he basically ends up finding out with his friend, and then later a group of professors and academics, that there is a massive catacomb below the ground that is just filled with the utmost horror and human perversion and revulsion, and a history of the most disgusting rites. Lovecraft always uses the term rites, R-I-T-E-S, that sort of thing. Orgiastic rites, and that is what has happened to his family and what his family is famous for, because in the story, basically the Delaporte name in that region is basically so horrific that nobody wanted to help rebuild the castle. It's not really a castle, I guess it's a manor house, something like that. Nobody wanted to do it because the Delaporte family, since Lovecraft lists the date in the story from like 1260 or something like that, when the Delaportes took over the ownership of this building. From that point onwards, they took on this sort of reputation as this horrible family. So that was his motivation as well, to rebuild it, make it like redeem his name. And ironically, well, at the end of the story, he reinforces the idea of Delapore madness, the sickness, the perversion, that sort of thing. So, one thing I really liked about the story was about the sense of time. It takes place in a very, very long time period. What I mean by that is this. The United States is a very new country, right? And as I pointed out in my previous video, Lovecraft had this thing about New England and Providence, especially setting his stories there. So everything basically is how old is the United States? Like 350 years. There's this sort of way of thinking that everything is happening in a very confined place of a very confined time period. If you look at maybe The Shadow over Innsmouth, well, it's set in on the coast of the United States, on the East Coast, New England area. That happened over maybe the period of like 300 years or something like that. 200, 100. I think the story takes place for over like 150 years in total. But if you look at The Rats in the Walls, there's mention of the cult. You see, the Delapore family was not the founders of the cult. This cult goes further back than the Romans, because when the Romans showed up in England, because the story is set in England, right? There was already the cult. It's mentioned there in the story. Lovecraft uses the word Cymric as a suggestion as to the origin of the cult, and Cymric basically I had to look this up. It means pertaining to the Welsh. It's relating to the Welsh. So it's basically the native Britons were the ones who started this cult, and the Romans came along and they sort of adopted some of this cult into their belief system. And then later on, in like the 13th century, I believe Lovecraft mentioned it there, the Delapore family come and they adopted. So everything has been taking place into this one area, this manor house, which served as basically this, it's the central hub for the sick and degenerate cult. And then comes along the poor protagonist and digs it all up. So that's what I really liked, that there's this great sense of time, because Lovecraft never really set many of his stories outside of New England. It doesn't really bother me, but it's nice to see a little bit of variety is all I'm saying. This constant reference in the story to the Romans, because there's a lot of reference to the Romans here, and also a lot of use of the, what do you call it, the Latin language, Latin. There's always the term that when the character goes sort of insane, he says Magna Mater, Magna Mater, and this basically translates to the Great Mother or something. I read that some scholars said, some Lovecraft scholars, I don't think it was Joshi, said, Magna Mater, the Great Mother, refers to Shub-Niggurath, but I think that's I don't buy that really. But anyway, this constant reference to the ancient Romans and that sort of stuff makes me think of The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. And you see, now Machen, he basically did the same thing that Lovecraft did, as in this horrific knowledge that you must not find out. And there's hidden monsters and realms and all that stuff. But instead of tentacled monsters and all that sort of stuff, Arthur Machen was more into the Roman stuff, already established real-world mythology. And I think that Lovecraft, being so in love with Arthur Machen and his literature, he sort of decided, well, maybe let's try that. So instead of Yog-Sothoth, Nyarlathotep, all these types of characters, we don't really see them. We see this constant reference to Cybele, which is I had to look this up, this was a Roman goddess, and just the Roman cult. This cult is just basically, they're cannibals, but they also do orgiastic rites, as in orgies, yes, fucking, and forbidden blasphemous rites as well. It's not even, satanic, because sometimes Lovecraft does use the term satanic to refer to some horrific things, even though he's an atheist. It's the characters are calling it satanic, not him. But again, this highlights its sense of time, that this predates Christianity. Before there was this sort of idea of, Christianic morals and that sort of thing. So I liked that there was the use of Romans, something beyond usual mythos entities, It was really refreshing, should I say. I have to say I really liked the ending as well. I think this was a really solid way to end the story. Basically what happens is they go down into the Twilight Grotto and they see just a sea of human bones. And some of these bones are so old that that is described in the story is that they basically look like Homo habilis or Homo erectus or something, you know, some sort of simian human type hybrid that is so old that this is going back to before man was even really evolved properly to look, you know, the skulls, because if you look at the skulls of primitive man, well, it looks like an ape, but a little bit more advanced. So there's really this imagery of the sea, absolute sea as far as the eye can see, of bones gnawed at by the rats, because, you know, they describe how the rats were gnawing at the bones eventually. And then there was also this one scene that I really liked, was when one of the characters went into this house, this primitive sort of structure there, and it was told that this was a butcher shop, right? So obviously, in the story, what is happening is that you have the cult, and that they were cannibals. They were not just like cannibals, like, you know, sort of like redneck cannibals from the Hills of Eyes or something like this. They had sort of like a ritualistic way of eating people, and they basically bred humans to be fodder, to be food, right? And these humans, they were like really degenerate in nature, some of them walking on 4 limbs rather than on the 2 legs as usual for a human. And they went into this butcher shop, and then they found English graffiti written on the wall. So there's already this establishment of this idea that this is a really ancient place. But then they go into this butcher shop there, and they found English graffiti. Then the protagonist, he goes into one of these holding cells, and then he finds like the skeleton, but on the skeleton's finger is the signal ring, you know, like the ring with a family crest on it of his family. And then basically that just drives him over the edge. And then it's a very subtle ending. I really like it. Basically, he's running through the darkness there, you know, with his cat. And then basically he runs into Norris. And then he just thinks Norris is like one of the rats, one of the giant rats, because they've been haunting him through this whole damn story. You know, he's paranoid about the rats, and he thinks Norris is a giant rat. And then he starts ranting, you know. He says there, basically, I mean, it starts out there that he says, "The war ate my boy, damn them all, and the Yanks ate Carfax with flames and burnt Grandshire, Delaporte, and the Secret. No, I tell you, I am not that demon swineherd in the Twilight Grotto." You know, and then basically he just starts slipping further and further, and as he slips into insanity further and further, he just goes on to get worse and worse. He says, "Curse you, Thornton, I'll teach you to faint at what my family do. Splud thou stinkard, I'll learn ye how to gust. Wold ye swink ye me think wees, magna mater, atis dia." Basically, that's how it ends. He just goes nuts. He cannot even speak properly. It's like he degenerates into this. It's like it all catches up to him, you know, what his family was doing. And then they find him basically eating Norris, and his cat is tearing at his throat, and he ends up in an asylum. And that's the end of the story, man. I just really love this great sense of time. And I think Lovecraft really should have set more of his stories in other locations, like the old world, really, you know, like Europe, Asia, Africa. Set more of them there, because there's more sense of time and that sort of thing. Basically, that's all I have to say on the story. That's my analysis. I really like the story. I reread it many times. I reread it to do this one. Yeah, that's all I have to say. But the video isn't over yet, is it? It's about the cat. Alright. The cat. I know a lot of you have been probably expecting me to say something about this cat. Alright, the cat is named Nigger Man. Alright. I don't know if YouTube is actually going to block my video, because they were getting really censorious lately. But the cat is called Nigger Man. And it's called Nigger Man for a good reason. good enough reason, not good enough for leftists. Lovecraft had a cat when he was a young boy called Niggerman, and he called the cat Niggerman, and he did that. He had the cat. I read somewhere in Joshi's notes that he named his cat when he was about like 8 or 9 years old. So, you know, it was a beloved pet of his. By the way, there's a famous picture of Lovecraft holding a cat. I've used it in a lot of my videos. That's not actually Lovecraft's cat, Niggerman. That's another cat, one of his friends. He just happened to take a photo with the cat. So the reason why Lovecraft chose that name for the cat in the story is just Lovecraft's constant tendency to include autobiographical features into his story, you know, sort of a way of inserting himself, you know. So the protagonist is Lovecraft, you know, he's imagining himself sort of, yes, this is me, and the cat is called Niggerman, just like in real life my cat is called Niggerman. One thing I do find quite hilarious is in modern adaptations, this constant need to tiptoe around it, you know. How can we, you know, if there's an adaptation, of which there are quite a few adaptations of The Rats and the Wolves, even the HPL Historic Society did it. They adapted the story, and then obviously you can't say Niggerman because it's going to trigger, you know, like the whole world. Is the constant way of trying to find a way around of saying Niggerman. My favorite ones so far was when Wayne June, nothing against Wayne June, he's a great guy, from my opinion, is that he called the cat Mr. Blackman, you know. And then another adaptation I saw, they called the cat Black Tom. Yeah, I just think it's actually a little bit funny, you know, because I mean it's a bit of a silly name for a cat. Even the offensiveness of modern day's interpretation of the name, it's a bit of a silly name for a cat, you know. I mean, you know, on one hand, like Lovecraft, he didn't like black people, so why would he call a cat? Because he loved cats, but he called the cat Niggerman. Like, what's the thing? So he's saying he's liking the cat, or he's insulting the cat? I don't know. That's weird. And of course, the best part of that name is the amount it triggers leftists. You know, they freak the fuck out about every time reading that story. The next time you want to have a good laugh, go on to like Goodreads or something and look up a review of The Rats and the Wolves, and I guarantee you, sir or ma'am, whoever's listening, that there will be someone complaining that they could not finish the story because the cat's name kept being repeated. It's brilliant. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say. This is already turning into an 18-minute video, I see. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Great story, highly recommend it. Yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.